What's going on? In this video I want to talk about 4 of the issues with using Magic Lantern on the Canon EOS M. So last week I made a video about this camera and it went absolutely insane. It has over 100,000 views now, which is the first time I think that's ever happened on my channel. 100,000 views in a week of uploading it. And I want to say, if you're new here from that video, or even if you watched that video in general, thank you so much. Seriously, the amount of support I've gotten from that video has just been amazing. And like I said, if you're here from that video and you subscribed from that, definitely stay tuned. I have lots of awesome videos coming up in the future about this camera, as well as just an insane amount of other cameras and lenses and just stuff that I've been planning recently. I have some awesome videos planned, so stay tuned for all that. And so one of the problems with that video is I really didn't go in depth on the issues with using Magic Lantern. And that video is pretty much just showcasing what you can do with it and some of the awesome things about it. And so in this video, I just want to quickly mention some of the issues with using Magic Lantern, because it's definitely not all sunshine and rainbows with using this firmware hack on the EOS M. And so the first thing I want to mention with using Magic Lantern is it just isn't a very reliable software. So you might have saw in some of the test footage, I got a few comments about it, is there's some like white specks showing up in the footage, which I don't even know where those came from. It just got recorded into the footage, so it's nothing to do with editing. It was just recorded straight from the camera, which could be an issue with some people. There's also issues with like pink frames and kind of like little glitches, as well as like skipped frames and stuff, and just little issues with the software that if you can only shoot something in one take and you only have one chance to get a certain piece of footage, if one of these issues pops up during that clip, it could totally ruin that shot, and it could just make that shot completely unusable, which definitely is a deal breaker for a lot of people. I really can't recommend using this for anyone that can't redo a shot and repeat it, you know, if something goes wrong. And so that's the first thing. You know, overall it's just not super reliable. It's not like just turning on the camera and recording with the standard Canon software, or just any software in any camera basically. It's nothing like that. There are issues with it that can definitely ruin some shots. Next up, the workflow with shooting raw footage. So raw footage is of course awesome. You know, it's just one of those things, everyone wants to shoot raw footage. It's like the highest form of footage you can shoot basically. A lot of people just don't think about the steps that it takes after you shoot that footage in terms of editing and delivery. And so with shooting raw footage, you essentially have to shoot the footage, import it into your computer as this MLV raw file, and then import that into the MLV software, which is like a separate piece of software you have to download in order to transcode this footage. You then do just a little bit of editing, whatever you want to. I typically just transform my raw footage into Sony S-Log3 footage and ProRes 422HQ. And I don't really do much editing besides maybe a little bit of exposure compensation and just stuff like that. And then you export that footage from that software into whatever file type you need. Like I said, I typically output in ProRes 422HQ, but there's a bunch of different settings you can output the footage into. So then once you output the footage from MLV, you can then take it into your editing software of choice, like Premiere Pro, Final Cut, or Resolve, and then start editing it like it's just footage straight out of the camera. You know, apply your LUTs, do color grading, color correcting, that sort of thing. So the workflow is much more in depth than just taking an SD card out, importing it to your computer, putting it into Final Cut Pro or whatever editing software you use. And it takes a long time usually to export these files from MLV software, and it basically just adds a lot of time and effort into your workflow, which of course could be a deal breaker for some people or might not affect anybody if you're already used to shooting raw footage, but that's also something to mention. And then next up, this just isn't very good for beginners in general. This software is very in-depth, a lot of finicky little settings you have to adjust, and overall there's really not much to talk about with this. It's just not good for beginners. If this is your first digital camera, I would recommend not downloading this software right now and just getting used to file formats, getting used to, you know, different codecs and, you know, recording formats and editing and just recording in general before you attempt to shoot raw footage with this, because it is very in-depth and very finicky, and there's just a lot of little things you need to know about and little settings you're gonna need to change in order to get the best footage possible. But that's pretty much it for number 3, is this is just not good for beginners. And then last but not least, this is not meant to be here to scare you. It's just a fact of doing this sort of firmware hack, and that's that Magic Lantern and installing it onto your camera can be dangerous for your camera. So since Magic Lantern is essentially a whole entire firmware that gets installed onto the camera, if you mess up the installation or if something isn't installed right, you risk a chance of essentially just breaking your camera, which means it'll just not have a software on it. You won't have any way to use the camera. It'll pretty much just be broken. Now the chances of this happening are very low, and if you follow the instructions exactly, this probably won't happen. However, like installing any sort of secondary firmware to something, there's definitely still a possibility that you could break your camera completely, and so definitely understand that when you decide to do this. And so definitely just understand that if you decide to install Magic Lantern on your EOS M. And so these are pretty much the main issues with using Magic Lantern that I didn't really cover in my last video. I'd recommend, if you're interested in doing this, just install it and do lots of testing, you know, record the different formats that you want to use in a bunch of different scenarios, import it, edit it, mess around with it, and really get to know the software before you decide to shoot something that's really important. Because all these issues in certain times can completely just add up and ruin shots, which definitely is not fun at the time. So either way, that's it for this video. Like I said, if you're here from my last video, thank you so much for watching it. The amount of views that video got just absolutely blew me away, so I really appreciate all of the support I got from it. I'll have more videos about this camera as well as just a bunch of other budget filmmaking and photography gear in the future, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next video.